Back in the golden era of print magazines, especially those about cars, technology, and machines, there were always projects in their pages for the home hobby guy to take on. Woodworking, gadgets to make life easier at the house, and things of the like. In the case of car magazines, it was about how to hot rod your daily driver, build a race car, or simply learn the basics of high-performance upgrades, paint, and more. But there's one project in the annals of Gearhead media that stands head and shoulders above the rest for its sheer, seeming, insane recklessness and overly fatalistic approach. 1962's Mechanix Illustrated Highway Kart. Yes, this was a street-legalized go-kart, built at home, of angle iron, and then turned loose on the literal highways of your home state. And no, I am not making this up. At all. The story doesn't begin with the wild blueprints you'll see in a few minutes, but rather with William Glenn Davis, who decided in about 1962 that he wanted to drive around the world on a go-kart. Not only did he decide to do it, he actually did it. Davis got Echo Manufacturing to pony up one of their Spider model go-karts, and he built the thing with a little MC-10 single-cylinder McCulloch engine, added headlights, taillights, turn signals, and all the other stuff, and then he got a set of license plates on it. Now, his cart actually pulled a tiny trailer with gas cans, a typewriter, and a sleeping bag, among other small stuff in it. Davis built his cart with a large diameter 66-tooth drive gear, and that meant that the thing would run over 50 miles an hour on flat land. And as a trial run, he wanted to drive it from Los Angeles to Mexico City. And the thing is, he drove it from Los Angeles to Mexico City. The trip took him 20 days, and he would stop and visit resorts and other things along the way. He left Mexico and drove to Dallas, Texas, where he got the bright idea to then go east and then go north, attempting to make it to New York City in the winter on a go-kart. And he did it. Davis legitimately crossed into New York City via the Holland Tunnel like tens of thousands of cars did and still do each day, and this isn't even the end of the story. In fact, you have to hear some of this in Davis's own words. Quote, "Arriving in Dallas, Texas, I decided for test purposes to change over to a Power Products AH82 engine. The mileage delivered by this engine proved to be comparable to the smaller McCulloch engine, but the PP mill gave me a higher cruising speed, 60 miles an hour. I was now headed east across the United States. As I crossed into Georgia, the weather took on a chill and I donned my jacket. In South Carolina, I bought a good pair of fur-lined gloves. By the time I hit North Carolina, I had put on my boots and insulated underwear, and as I approached Richmond, Virginia, I was greeted by one of the worst snowstorms the East had experienced in 12 years, forcing me to hole up in a motel for a day until the storm was over. Then, after thawing out my engine, I was on my way again. The road was relatively dry until I was within 50 miles of Washington, D.C., where ice and snow patches became more frequent, but the biting cold and the fact that I was driving without a windshield caused me more anguish than the icy roads. Yet, I knew it had all been worthwhile when I finally scooted out of the New York side of the Holland Tunnel and into the big town." In New York, Davis met a cartoonist named Stan Mott, and Davis pitched the international angle of his trip, and a few days later, Mott joined him, loading their carts onto a freighter that they sailed on to Italy, and photo evidence shows that they traversed Europe in their go-karts, but there's no real record of how it all turned out or what happened next. Now, thankfully, there's not a story of a bus turning them into a grease spot in the middle of the road, but incidentally, while on a mini-bike adventure a year or two later, Davis was adamant, telling reporters in multiple cities that he had traveled over 32,000 miles by go-kart, not counting the time it spent on a ship. And frankly, I kind of believe him. Now, we got to get back to the highway kart. Inspired by Davis's tale of international adventure, the editors at Mechanix Illustrated decided to bring this wildly self-punishing and dangerous method of conveyance to their readership, and they upped the ante. Instead of telling people to buy one, they were going to show you how to build it yourself. Now, for the record, I am not a wimp or a coward or someone who yells at people for running with scissors. That ain't me. But I am a person of sound mind, and the idea of getting into traffic on a go-kart, not only now in the modern world with cell phones, but in 1962 with manual brakes, zero F's given for impaired driving, and cars with more angular surfaces than a saw blade factory, this was a wild and reckless idea. but it was convenient. Quoting from the story from the May 1962 issue of Mechanix Illustrated by R.J. Capistotto, he writes, "Driving a kart is a real thrill. Seated on a low-slung frame only inches from the ground, you'll feel as if you're doing 80 miles an hour when you're only doing 20, and yet it's surprisingly safe. The low center of gravity with a width 2/3 the length make it almost impossible to flip a kart in a tight turn. And just about everyone who tries a kart gets the urge to own one. And if you've got that urge, you get a bonus in building the Mechanix Illustrated Highway Kart. Since karts are generally driven on special tracks, it's not necessary to register them. However, transporting a kart is often a problem. It can be hauled in a station wagon if you own a wagon, or it can be towed on a trailer. Either way, the lugging can be quite a nuisance. With this in mind, our model was designed so that registration could be obtained, making it possible to drive the kart to its destination on public roads. Our plates were obtained in New York. However, regulations vary and the requirements would have to be checked in other states. First, we had to supply 3 things: proof of ownership, a bill of sale for the engine, an affidavit stating that the kart was built by ourselves, and a list of the parts used. To make the kart legally roadworthy, it had to have front and rear bumpers, a brake on each of the rear wheels, headlights, taillights, turn signals, a rear license plate, and a horn. In use, the headlights are required to be 24 inches from the ground. A permanent arrangement of this sort would not be desirable, so we mounted the lights on an adjustable bracket, which allowed them to be lowered. Electrifying the kart was simplified by using a Clinton E65 1100 series engine with a built-in 12-volt flywheel generator. This eliminated the need for a heavy battery, relay, and external generator. The engine delivers 5.2 horsepower and has a 5.76 cubic inch displacement, putting it in the Class A category. It's fitted with an impact starter, and 4 turns of the crank, followed by a press to release the spring, are sufficient to start the engine. A Mercury centrifugal clutch permits no-load starting and free-load idling, and it automatically applies the load to the engine at its most efficient speed. Brakes are the 6-inch internal expanding type, and if you don't plan to register the kart, 1 brake will be sufficient in the Class A category. For simple and sturdy construction, angle iron is used throughout. This eliminates welding of fishmouth joints on tubing, and something which is rather difficult unless you're an experienced welder. Welding angle iron is very easy by comparison. It's also easy to shape the angle iron by cutting slits or notches in one side and bending it in a vise. The story goes on to detail how to build each and every facet of the go-kart, including forming a steering wheel of 3/8 steel bar, and how the steering itself should be set up and welded together, and really all the other attributes of what the kart should and would be. I mean, these guys even went the extra mile using latex house paint to make the tiny go-kart tires into white walls. In the end, it says the kart cost $201.74, including all the materials and the engine, which works out with inflation to be about $2,000 in 2024 money. Now, I have no idea if anybody ever built one of these, or let alone drove one on public streets or registered it in whatever state or country or planet they live on. But again, this is wild. I'm guessing back then, not only was there no legal department, there was no conception of ever having one in that era of time. I mean, if there was, this thing would have been taken out back and cut into pieces before it ever saw the light of day. Outside of a guide for playing in traffic with your children, I'm not sure of a more dangerous thing that Mechanix Illustrated could have published. I've never seen a record of another singular person making one of these at any level, or for any level, for that matter. In my book, encouraging a mass audience to build a 5-horsepower go-kart of angle iron and then getting it registered and driving it in highway traffic is just beyond crazy. I'm thinking the following month's issue might have been juggling chainsaws for fun and profit. That's the interesting, I hope, and short tale of the most whacked magazine project of all time, 1962's Mechanix Illustrated Highway Kart. Now, a question for those of you, and please answer in the comments. Would you take this 5-horsepower wonder into interstate traffic? Right now, today. Would you do it? I'm Brian Loans. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more Gearhead history, drag racing, and mechanical fun.